Good morning. This is Deepak, and I just arrived at the Chopra Center for Wellbeing in Carlsbad, California, from New York. And I got here pretty late last night, and it's about 5:30 in the morning, and I'm going for my yoga class. But I thought before I start my day to share with you this idea of what does it mean to lead from the level of soul. Okay, now let me go into a story to set the stage for what it means to lead from the level of soul. Many years ago, when I was about 7 years of age, and living in a small town in India called Jabalpur, my parents started to talk about the fact that Mr. Nehru, who was the first Prime Minister of India, was coming to our little town. And I was about 7, my brother was about 4, my father was an army doctor, and my mother was the best mother in the whole world, to us anyway. So we read in the newspaper that Mr. Nehru was coming to our town, and he was going to cut the ribbon opening an automobile factory. And for 3 weeks, there was only one conversation in our house. What was the color of the sari that my mother would wear for the occasion? And of course, my father would tease her and say, there's going to be millions of people, and he's not going to be noticing your sari. Anyway, the day arrived. We were there at 4:30 in the morning on the streets, waiting for his motorcade, and there were millions of people there. Millions, and when I say millions in India, it means millions, not hundreds of thousands, but literally millions. Wherever you could see a sea of humanity, people standing on each other's shoulders, on rooftops, hanging by window ledges, on buses, etc., etc. And by 7:30, there were even more people. So even though we had a privileged place on the street, it was crazy. People were pushing each other, rambunctious crowd, something like what you might see in a football match in Manchester or something like that, or even here. But here it's not so rowdy for the matches, etc. Imagine rowdiness to the extreme, people pushing, jostling, etc. At 9:30, 5 hours after we'd been there, the motorcade arrived, and Mr. Nehru was standing in a jeep. He had a white Nehru jacket, a red rose in his lapel, which was his signature, his brand, you might say, his logo, and the crowd went crazy. And they started shouting and screaming, "Long live India, long live Mr. Nehru," etc., etc. And then the jeep, it was a simple motorcade, a jeep. He was standing in the center, and there was a motorcycle in front of him, a motorcycle at the back, and it was moving slowly through the streets as people were shouting and screaming. And at precisely, say, 9:35, the jeep went past where we were. Me and my little brother, who recently has been the Dean of Medical Education at Harvard Medical School, my father in his army uniform, Second World War, with beautiful medals, my mother in a pink sari. The jeep went past, Mr. Nehru turned. I remember this in slow motion. And I swear to God, he looked at my mother, he took his rose out and he threw it at her. And the crowd gasped, except for my mother, who stepped forward like a great queen, picked up the rose and looked at my father and said, "Daddy, what did I tell you? What did I tell you?" And then we went home. She said, "Let's go home." In my mind, I knew she was the leader of our family. When we went home, she planted the rose in a vase. She put the rose in a vase, emptied the room altogether, and there was just a table and the rose. And for the next 3 weeks, people came to our house to look at the rose. And they took off their shoes, which you do in India in a house of veneration. And then they tiptoed into the room and just looked at the rose in silence. After 3 weeks, the rose started to fade. And my mother had a party, and she gave her best friends each a rose petal. So afterwards, we asked my mother, what was so special about those roses and those rose petals? And she said every petal in the rose symbolically represented the soul of India. And when we asked her what that meant, she said Mahatma Gandhi had died a few years ago as the great saint leader of India, assassinated, violently killed by a Hindu fanatic. But his legacy would live on, and Mr. Nehru was the spiritual heir to Mahatma Gandhi. And whenever they looked at him and they saw the rose petals, they were reminded of the collective dream. And that's what a great leader is. A great leader is the soul of a collective consciousness that becomes an agent for transformation, from what is to what could be. Just like Martin Luther King, when he said, I have a dream, it was not a personal dream, but a collective dream. So that became a big theme in our house. How do you connect to the place inside you, which is connected to all that exists? How do you connect to a place within you where you can be a leader and bring about transformation in the collective consciousness and even reach critical mass? So what we have designed, Danielle Posa and I, Danielle Posa, by the way, is a well-being advisor and a corporate leadership advisor who's worked with me for almost 7 years. Initially, she was at Gallup, and now she is independent and has her own consulting company. And together, we are leading this course through our new entity called Radical Wellbeing. And the course is about how do you get in touch with this place deep, deep, deep in the core of your being, where only the highest truth counts. This is your true self, which is a field of infinite possibilities, which is a field of infinite creativity, a field of synchronicity, a field from where the power of intention truly comes from as organizing its own fulfillment. The strongest intentions, the sankalpa of the soul, resides here. And you begin to actualize not only personal and collective dreams from this place, but you get the support of nature and the infinite organizing power of intention leads to consequences, events, relationships, and circumstances that allow you to access the law of least effort. Anyway, that's what the course is about, and we also talk about emotional intelligence, the ability to love and have compassion, the ability to fulfill or realize worthy outcomes, and the ability to get in touch with the deepest part of yourself. Emotional intelligence, expanding awareness from the ordinary levels to intuition, creativity, meaning, purpose, higher consciousness, even getting in touch with the archetypal self, which encodes the collective imagination and the collective creativity and resides in the unconscious domains of our own existence. We have access to that. So expanding awareness, being action-oriented, taking responsibility, finding true empowerment through self-esteem, and understanding and harnessing the power of synchronicity.